My name is Vanessa Whitmore. I'm 34 years old, a cardiology resident, and a single mother raising 3-year-old twins. 2 months ago, I was lying in the back of an ambulance, bleeding internally after a serious car accident. The sirens screamed through the night while my hands shook, desperately holding my phone as I made one last call to my family. I just need someone to watch Lily and Lucas for a few hours. I'm about to go into surgery. I truly believed that, at least in that moment, they would come. But instead, I got a message in the family group chat. "You're always such a burden. We're going to see Taylor Swift with Vanessa tonight. Figure it out yourself." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Those words had come from my own mother. A second later, my father added, "You're a doctor. Stop acting like it's the end of the world." And then my sister sent nothing but a laughing emoji. In that moment, somewhere between the pain, the fear, and the humiliation, something inside me completely shattered. And that same night, I made a decision that would force my entire family to face the consequences for months afterward. If you want to hear the full story, the story of how the woman everyone treated like the burden finally stood up and reclaimed her worth, comment 1 below. Because by the end of this story, you may realize something truly important about self-respect and the limits we should never allow people to cross. By the time the ambulance rushed into the emergency entrance, I could barely feel my legs anymore. Doctors and nurses moved frantically around me, heart monitors echoing through the trauma bay, but my mind was focused on only one thing: my 2 children waiting at home with their babysitter. She could only stay until 8 o'clock. I had less than 40 minutes to find someone to take care of Lily and Lucas before they wheeled me into surgery. Marcus, an ER doctor from my hospital, noticed my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. He didn't ask questions. He simply handed me his own phone without saying a word. I immediately searched for a 24/7 emergency nanny service. I agreed to pay 3 times the normal rate just to get someone to my house that same night. Everything was handled in 4 minutes. 4 minutes. For complete strangers to save my situation, while my own family couldn't even bother asking whether I might die. As they rolled me toward the operating room, I still remember the icy feeling crawling down my spine. But this time, it wasn't from the physical pain. It came from finally realizing a heartbreaking truth. For years, I had never truly been a daughter in that family. I was only the person they called whenever they needed someone to fix their problems or pay for them. And lying in that hospital bed that night, I quietly made a decision I had never been brave enough to make before. The surgery lasted nearly 4 hours. When I finally woke up, the first thing I saw wasn't my parents, and it definitely wasn't my sister. It was the cold white light of the recovery room and a nurse quietly changing my IV bag beside me. No missed calls, no messages asking if I was okay. No one had come. I lay there staring at the hospital ceiling for several long minutes before slowly reaching for my phone and opening my banking app. And what I did next changed my family's entire life. If you're wondering what decision I made in that hospital bed, leave a dot in the comments. Because trust me, no one in my family saw what was coming next. I stared at the list of automatic payments glowing on my phone screen. One familiar transaction after another appeared like a routine that had been woven into my life for the past 8 years. $2,400 a month for my parents' mortgage, $800 for their health insurance, and countless other emergencies, car repairs, a new roof, utility bills, even the times Vanessa needed extra support for her fashion career. For years, I convinced myself it was my responsibility. I kept telling myself that someday my family would notice everything I sacrificed for them. That if I gave enough, loved enough, endured enough, maybe one day they would love me the way they loved Vanessa. But lying in that hospital bed, my surgical incisions still burning with pain, while my 2 little children were being watched by strangers, I finally understood something. People rarely appreciate what they believe will always be there, and my family had always assumed I would be there to save them. My hand trembled slightly as I pressed the button, cancel auto payment. Once, then again, and again, until every recurring transfer completely disappeared from my account. After that, I opened my contacts. Block Dad, block Mom, block Vanessa. There was no dramatic music, no tears, just a strange sense of relief. Like for the very first time in years, I had finally chosen myself before everyone else. 3 days after my surgery, Marcus stopped by my hospital room carrying a cup of hot coffee. He sat down in the chair beside the window and looked at me quietly for a long moment before speaking. "Are you sure about this?" I knew exactly what he meant. I gave a small nod. "It's been 8 years, Marcus. I'm tired." He didn't ask anything else. Maybe because he had seen those messages in the ambulance that night. Maybe because he understood that wounds caused by family can hurt far more than physical injuries ever do. That evening, after Lily and Lucas video called me before bedtime, I lay alone in the quiet hospital room and started replaying everything in my mind. I remembered the day I graduated from medical school. My parents arrived almost 2 hours late because they had been taking Vanessa to meet a fashion investor. No flowers, no celebration dinner, just one rushed photo in the parking lot. Meanwhile, 3 years earlier, the entire family had flown to New York for Vanessa's first fashion show. 5-star hotel, front row seats. My father posted dozens of photos on Facebook with the caption, "Our talented daughter." And me? I was always the practical child, the one who could take care of herself, the one they believed would never leave, no matter how badly they treated her. But the favoritism didn't stop with emotions. It followed me deep into adulthood, in ways I didn't fully recognize back then. 8 years ago, right after I graduated from medical school, my father called me late one night. His voice sounded tense and embarrassed. "Vanessa, your mother and I are going through a little financial trouble. The mortgage payment is due soon. Could you help us just this once? Just this once." I still remember those exact words. That same night, I transferred $2,400 without hesitation. I thought it was simply what a daughter was supposed to do. But just once quickly became every month. The mortgage, insurance, car repairs, roof repairs, money Vanessa needed to follow her passion. I never said no. Even when I was pregnant with twins and the man I loved walked away during my 5th month, I still kept sending money to my family. I still remember the night I was hospitalized for pregnancy complications. I called my mother in panic, hoping that maybe this time she would come. But all she said was, "Vanessa's stressed after her Milan fashion show. I can't leave her right now." They didn't come. No one came. Not when I gave birth. Not during the nights I was barely surviving while raising 2 newborns alone and studying for my cardiology boards at the same time. But the money transfers? Those never stopped. There were nights when I slept less than 2 hours. Lily would start crying at 1 in the morning. Lucas would spike a fever at 3. By 6 a.m., I had to be back at the hospital for another 16-hour shift. I was a cardiology resident, and a single mother with absolutely no one beside me. But the thing that exhausted me the most was never the job itself. It was the constant pressure to be the strong one in my family. Because every time I admitted I was tired, they would say the same thing. "Vanessa's always fine." And for years, I believed them. Until that night in the ambulance, when my sister responded with nothing but a laughing emoji after the message. "You're always such a burden." That was the moment I finally understood something. People who truly love you will never treat your sacrifices like they're guaranteed. They won't only remember you when they need money, help, or someone to quietly carry the weight of everything behind the scenes. For so long, I thought enduring the pain was how you kept a family together. But sometimes, the more silent you stay, the more people convince themselves they're allowed to hurt you. If you've ever felt like the person who sacrifices everything for others but is never truly appreciated, leave a 2 in the comments. Because I know exactly how deeply that kind of pain cuts. 5 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. My body still ached from surgery, and every step felt like it pulled against the stitches in my abdomen. But what exhausted me most wasn't the physical pain. It was the thought of walking back into an empty house and pretending nothing had happened. The moment I stepped through the front door, my phone started vibrating. "Mom." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then let it ring until it stopped. 1 minute later, Dad called. Then Vanessa. Over and over again. For the first time in years, their money hadn't arrived on schedule, and suddenly, they remembered I existed. I laughed, a quiet laugh, but so bitter that even I barely recognized it. That same night, the messages started flooding in. What exactly are you doing? The mortgage payment hasn't gone through. Your parents' insurance is overdue now. You could have at least warned us. Not one person asked if I was recovering. No one asked how the surgery went. No one asked whether my children had been terrified while their mother spent nearly a week in the hospital. The only thing they cared about was the money. I sat silently on the couch, watching the messages continue to appear one after another. And for the first time in my life, I didn't respond immediately. I turned my phone face down on the table, pulled Lily and Lucas into my arms, and quietly let my family's entire world begin to collapse, without me there to hold it together anymore. 2 weeks after I was discharged from the hospital, on a quiet Saturday morning while I was making pancakes for Lily and Lucas, an unexpected knock echoed through the house. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. My chest tightened instantly. For a second, I assumed it was my parents. Maybe they had finally decided to show up in person to pressure me about the money. I walked slowly to the door and looked through the peephole, then froze. Standing outside was my grandfather, Thomas. His silver hair was perfectly combed back, dressed in the same tailored gray suit I remembered from childhood, carrying the unmistakable presence of a man who had spent 40 years serving as a federal judge. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 years. Every time I tried bringing the twins to visit him, my parents always had an excuse. He's busy. Don't bother him. Maybe another time. The moment I opened the door, he pulled me into a tight embrace. Vanessa. His voice cracked slightly as his eyes dropped to the surgical scar that still hadn't fully healed. I know everything. I went still. Aunt Eleanor told me what happened. He stepped inside, sat down beside the twins, who stared at him curiously, and slowly pulled an elegant cream-colored envelope from his coat pocket. Next week is my 70th birthday party. Then he looked directly into my eyes, and it's time this family finally hears the truth. That night, after Lily and Lucas had fallen asleep, I sat alone at the dining table with my laptop glowing in the middle of the dark apartment. Beside me were dozens of printed bank statements. Every month, every year, every payment I had sent my parents over the past 8 years. $2,400, $800, $3,000, $5,000. There were months when I worked endless hospital shifts with almost no sleep just to keep everything afloat for them, while I survived on instant noodles to save enough money for a nanny for my children. Grandpa wanted me to print all of it. Not for revenge, he told me over the phone, but because the truth deserves to be seen. It took me nearly 4 hours to organize everything into one thick file. And when I finally looked at the stack of papers in front of me, even I felt overwhelmed. More than $360,000. 8 years of my life. 8 years of silence. Right then, my phone buzzed. A message from a cousin I barely spoke to anymore. Vanessa, I think you should be careful. Vanessa's been telling people that ever since the accident, you've been mentally unstable. Your parents are saying you're making things up and cutting everyone off for no reason. I read the message over and over again, then let out a bitter laugh. Even now, they still didn't believe they had done anything wrong. They were simply trying to turn me into the crazy one, before the truth had a chance to come out. My grandfather's birthday party was held at the old estate just outside Boston, the same place where nearly every major family gathering had taken place for as long as I could remember. As my car pulled through the gates, I saw a long line of luxury vehicles parked along both sides of the driveway. Almost the entire family was there. I took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. Lily and Lucas held tightly onto my hands, while the thick folder inside my bag sat heavily against my side like a secret powerful enough to change everything. Inside the mansion, soft violin music drifted beneath warm golden lights. Servers moved gracefully through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne, while relatives laughed and chatted in small groups. And then I saw them. My parents stood near the fireplace, dressed elegantly, smiling as if nothing had ever happened. Vanessa was the first to walk toward me. Her designer dress fit perfectly, and she wore that same polished smile she had mastered years ago. "Oh, Vanessa," she said, pretending to give me a light hug. "I heard you were in an accident. It wasn't too serious, was it?" I looked directly into her eyes. "Ruptured spleen, internal bleeding. I almost died." Her smile froze for exactly 1 second. Mom said it was just a minor accident. Mom wasn't there. The air between us turned cold instantly, and in that moment, I understood something clearly. By the end of this night, no one in this family would be able to keep pretending anymore. About 30 minutes into the party, I was pouring juice for Lily when I heard Vanessa's voice behind me. Soft, concerned, perfectly rehearsed. Honestly, I'm really worried about Vanessa. The group of relatives near the dessert table immediately turned toward her. Ever since the accident, she's been acting really strange. She cut our parents off for no reason and started saying things that just aren't true. My mother instantly joined in, her eyes glossy as if she were the real victim. We've only been trying to help her, but Vanessa's become so sensitive lately. I think the pressure of being a single mom may have pushed her over the edge. Sympathetic looks slowly began turning toward me. A few relatives whispered quietly, "Poor thing, maybe she really isn't okay." I stood there silently. No reaction. No explanation. Because for the first time in my life, I understood that some people will try to paint you as crazy the moment you start telling the truth. Then suddenly, the sharp sound of a glass tapping echoed through the room. The entire party fell silent. Grandfather Thomas slowly rose from his chair beside the fireplace. Even at 70 years old, he still carried the kind of presence that could silence an entire room with a single look. "Before this evening continues," he said calmly, his voice steady, "there are a few things I'd like to say to this family." And in that exact moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. If you've ever had people twist the truth to make you look like the villain, leave a 2 in the comments, because sometimes silence hurts far more than any insult ever could. Before my grandfather could continue speaking, my father suddenly stepped forward. "Dad, wait." He tried to keep his voice calm, but I could still see the tension in his eyes. "Before everyone gets the wrong idea, I think the family should know that Vanessa hasn't been mentally stable since the accident." The entire room immediately fell silent. My mother stood beside him, clutching a handkerchief tightly in her trembling hands. "We're only worried about her," she said, her voice breaking perfectly. "She cut off contact with the family and started claiming we abandoned her. But that's not what happened at all." Vanessa quickly stepped in. Vanessa's always been the sensitive one in the family. She tends to exaggerate things and make them seem worse than they really are. A few relatives started looking at me with sympathy, as if I were the problem, as if everything they had done to me for years had never happened. I could feel Lily tightening her arms around my neck, frightened by the tension filling the room. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood what it felt like to watch your entire story get twisted right in front of your eyes. Then Grandfather Thomas spoke, not loudly, but with a coldness that instantly stole the air from the room. "Richard?" He slowly placed his wine glass down on the table. "Are you finished?" The atmosphere inside the mansion turned completely still. My father froze for a few seconds under my grandfather's stare. "Dad? I just don't want people getting the wrong impression." "The wrong impression?" Grandfather repeated slowly. "Then today, let's speak with the truth." He stepped into the center of the room, still carrying the commanding presence of a judge walking into the final courtroom of his career. Then he looked directly at my father. "Richard, who has been paying the mortgage on your house for the last 8 years. My father's face immediately lost color. "What?" "I'll ask again," my grandfather said, his voice cold and precise. "Who paid $20,400 every single month for that house over 96 consecutive months?" No one answered. My mother shifted uncomfortably. "That was just Vanessa helping the family a little? A little?" Grandfather opened the thick folder in his hands. The sound of paper echoed sharply through the silent room. "Mortgage payments, $230,400. Health insurance, $76,800. Home repairs, car expenses, and additional financial support, over $45,000. Every number landed like a hammer against the silence hanging over the family. Whispers immediately started spreading across the room. Several relatives were now staring at my parents very differently. And Vanessa, at some point, her face had turned completely pale. But grandfather wasn't finished. He slowly pulled his phone from his coat pocket. "And there's one more thing." His eyes swept across the room. something this entire family needs to hear. The entire room fell completely silent as my grandfather unlocked his phone. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. He adjusted his glasses, looked directly at my parents, and slowly read the message out loud. "Vanessa, you're always such a burden. We're going to see Taylor Swift with Vanessa tonight. Figure it out yourself." A shocked gasp came from somewhere in the back of the room. Then the entire party seemed to erupt at once. "Oh my God. I can't believe this. Your daughter was in an ambulance and you said that to her?" My mother burst into tears immediately. "It's not what everyone thinks." But this time, no one rushed to defend her. Grandfather continued, his voice growing heavier. "When Vanessa received that message, she was bleeding internally in the back of an ambulance on her way into emergency surgery." He paused for several seconds. "The only thing she asked for was someone to watch her two small children for a few hours." My father tried stepping forward. "Dad, this is being blown out of proportion." "Did you call her back?" My grandfather interrupted sharply. My father said nothing. "Did you go to the hospital?" Still silence. "Did you ever once ask whether your daughter might die?" No one could answer anymore. And for the first time in my entire 34 years of life, I watched my parents stop being the center of the story. The truth was now standing in the middle of that room instead. I stood there holding Lily in my arms, while Lucas pressed himself tightly against my leg, watching the entire room sink into a silence heavier than anything I had ever felt before. No one was looking at me like the overly sensitive daughter anymore. There were no more doubtful stares, no more pity. For the first time, people were finally seeing the truth. My father stared down at the floor in silence. My mother cried so hard she could barely remain standing. And Vanessa, the woman who had always been the center of attention in this family, stood completely frozen, as if she no longer knew what to say. But strangely enough, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt relieved. Relieved that I no longer had to keep living inside a story other people had created for me. 1 year after that night, my life looked completely different. I moved into a new apartment closer to the hospital. The money I used to send my parents now went directly into college funds for Lily and Lucas. And Grandfather Thomas became the first real family member who taught me that love should never have to be earned through endless sacrifice. And most importantly, I finally learned how to choose myself first. If you stayed until the end of this story, thank you, truly. Out of the thousands of videos out there, the fact that you spent your time here means more than you know. And if this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel and join me for more stories like this. Stories for anyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, and eventually found their worth again.